Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we're going to be doing our first 2021 NHL mock draft simulation. Now, with this crazy 2021 draft, there is a lot of unpredictability, but we're basically almost 1 month through the season, and we got an idea of which teams will likely be at the bottom of the standings. But which prospects are most likely to go in this year's top 15, and who is the most likely player to be the first overall pick in this mock draft simulation? Watch till the end for all of the draft rankings, all the draft hype, and hit that subscribe button if you're new. 65% of the people that are watching these videos are not subscribed, so we'd love to have you, and join the Grab Gang for more hockey videos just like this. Now, of course, before we actually get into the players that are going where, we first need to determine which teams are actually picking in this year's top 15. And of course, we're going to be using Tankathon once again to determine the top 3 at least of this year's draft order, and it's pretty interesting to say the least. We did the draft lottery simulation just last night, and here are your results. For the first overall pick, the Vancouver Canucks are finally awarded the first overall pick, winning the draft lottery, which makes this a little bit unrealistic, but still, we'll go with it. Canucks fans, through all the agony so far, will get that draft lottery win and will pick first overall. The second overall pick will go to the Seattle Kraken, who raise a spot there. The expansion team getting the second overall pick in the draft. And for the third overall pick, the Detroit Red Wings do move up, do get that type of pick, and hey, at least they won the draft lottery somewhat this year. But we're going to get into the other picks, of course, as we get into them. But we need to start out today with the first overall pick, and the player who will go number 1 to the Vancouver Canucks. They end up winning this year's draft lottery. And for the first overall pick to start out this year's mock draft simulation, the Vancouver Canucks will select American defenseman with the first overall pick, Luke Hughes. Now, it makes almost too much sense for Vancouver to do this and to select Luke Hughes number 1. There is some other options out there. Obviously, you got the favorites in guys like Owen Power, who could also fit well in Vancouver, but I think this is basically a home run for them. Having Quinn Hughes and Luke Hughes on just a pairing together would be absolutely unreal. Now, there is some hurdles for that to happen because Luke Hughes and Quinn Hughes are both left-handed. They're both playing on the left side, so I think more realistically, Luke Hughes goes to the right and then they kind of figure something out. But just having those two guys on the same team, I think would be absolutely wonderful. And if they are in the same pairing, I think it would work off each other pretty beautifully. But I really like the defensive potential there. It hasn't really, at least right now, really been able to get going. And I think there has been some games where it has been rather disappointing. But I can see the potential there. I can see where it can go to. And if he can really work on that side of things, I think especially in a pairing with Quinn Hughes, it would be absolutely beautiful. Getting the two Hughes brothers together, and maybe Jack Hughes someday soon, would be fantastic for the Vancouver Canucks, and I think having that duo connection for the first time since the Sedins would be pretty awesome to see. But now we gotta go on to the second overall pick and go to the Seattle Kraken, who will make their first ever selection and will go with their first player in franchise history. And at number 2, I think it's pretty obvious who they'll go for, at least if they're trying to start out a franchise. That'll be 6'4" defenseman, Canadian D-man, University of Michigan D-man, Owen Power. I think Owen Power makes a lot of sense for the Seattle Kraken in terms of potential, in terms of what you can get. Owen Power is still, in my opinion, one of the best in the draft. I still have some major concerns with him, especially on defense, where there is potential there, just like Luke Hughes, but I think he's been worse defensively than Luke Hughes sometimes. But I think there's still a lot of room to grow there, and the potential is pretty sky high. I think the offense, though, is really what Owen Power is greatest at. His skating is really fluid, and I think there is some times where he can kind of get caught in his own zone, but in terms of power play, in terms of puck protection, in terms of puck handling, he's really a solid defenseman overall on the offensive side. And I think for the Seattle Kraken to start out with that kind of power play quarterback, that type of franchise face, and the name of Owen Power on the Seattle Kraken, I think it makes a lot of sense, and having almost a cornerstone D to start out would be pretty helpful for them too. Then I'm going to go to the third overall pick in the Detroit Red Wings, and we've gone from a couple of picks that are pretty obvious to a pick that some people might not see as obvious, but I think especially at third overall, the Detroit Red Wings are running up to the stage to select Swedish goaltender Jesper Wallstedt. Jesper Wallstedt is one of the most interesting goalie prospects, and in my opinion, one of the best goalie prospects we've seen since Vasilevsky, since Carey Price, and his performance in the SHL has gotten better and better, which is unreal to think about. His first few games were incredible in the SHL, but it seems like even after the World Juniors, which he played great in, he has gotten even even more consistent, even better overall. And the thing is, no goaltender in their draft year really plays in the SHL whatsoever. That is very rare to happen, let alone be one of the best goalies in the league, which Jesper Wallstedt has already kind of been so far. I think Wallstedt's potential is definitely through the roof. He's not as flamboyant as a Yaroslav Askarov, at least in terms of play style, but he's such a calm, such a mature, and such a great presence on the blue paint. And I think he's a guy that the Detroit Red Wings really need. I mean, they need a goalie prospect. They don't really have anybody whatsoever besides maybe Philip Larson, but I think Jesper Wallstedt can be almost a franchise goaltender. That Detroit really is the only thing that they're lacking right now in their prospect pool. But now we're going to go to probably one of the biggest losers of this draft lottery, that being the Ottawa Senators. They dropped 3 spots from the simulation, from the best odds to number 4, and will select with a 4th overall pick. And for the Ottawa Senators, there's quite a few options here, especially on defense, but I think they pretty much sorted out their defensive future with guys like Sanderson, with guys like Chabot and Brandstrom, and the options they have there are pretty plentiful. So I think they're already pretty set when it comes to that. Maybe they'll select a defenseman in the second round or something, but I think with their first pick in this draft, especially if this guy's available, I think he's pretty much the perfect fit and a guy that they, especially up the middle, have been missing in their prospect pool. That being American center Matthew Beniers. Now, I've talked about Matthew Beniers a ton. I think Matthew Beniers has the potential to be the best player of this draft, and I think right now is the best player at the moment. He's such a fantastic overall consistent center. And for the Ottawa Senators, center-wise right now, especially with Colin White not really factoring into their future too much, they got Josh Norris and nobody really that is able to fill that hole outside of him. I mean, unless they develop Tim Stützle as a center, which I personally would not do, they don't really have anybody besides Norris that can really come up to that level, besides maybe Shane Pinto. I forgot about him, sorry. But those guys are more along the side of a middle 6C. Meanwhile, I think Matthew Beniers has the potential to be a number 1 guy. He might not be the best first-line center out there, but he's really responsible, really solid in almost every single category, and I think he's one of the few prospects in this draft that really doesn't have any weaknesses whatsoever, or at least no major ones, and he's just able to be such a calm presence, such a great leader, and I think as a future Ottawa Senator, it makes a lot of sense for their franchise. Now we're going to go on to the New York Rangers, though, with the 5th overall pick, and this season has been a pretty big disaster for the New York Rangers just in everything. They just lost against the Buffalo Sabres, and they were the second best odds when I did this draft lottery simulation. They, just like the Ottawa Senators, dropped down pretty hard and go to the 5th overall pick, but they'll still be able to get a pretty solid player here, and I think they will go for a Swedish player, or a Swedish winger, but also potentially center, William Eklund. Now, here's the thing. I think they select William Eklund on the basis of him being a center, and I still think there's a lot of reason to think that he can develop into one. He's been playing in the wings so far in the SHL this year, and he's been wonderful at that, but he is a pretty natural center, and I think he can transition to that center position, and I think long-term could be a great second-line center behind maybe Mika Zibanejad, potentially maybe have Philip Hedl as a third-line center, we'll see, but I think William Eklund is definitely one of the best prospects in this draft. But then we're going to go on to the 6th overall pick, and this is the pick that the Arizona Coyotes would fill, but because of the Chayka situation, their pick will be forfeited, so there will be no 6th overall pick in this simulation. We're now going to go to the 7th overall pick in place of that, and the Edmonton Oilers will fill that spot right now. Now, I don't know if this will continue Edmonton's woes, but it's not been the greatest season for them so far. But with the 7th overall pick, I do see them going for another winger, but a guy that more along the side of the right wing, I would say, for them long term. That would be Canadian winger Kent Johnson. Now, I know they went after Dylan Holloway last time, but I don't really see them going for a center or a defenseman, really, because you already got some great quality defensive prospects there. You already got a lot of, obviously, centers in Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, and I don't think they need either of those positions. I think Jesper Wallstedt would be perfect for them, but I don't see him falling to number 7 at the moment. So I think they'll go for another winger, and Kent Johnson, I think, is a quality option at number 7. His offense is really fun. He's a really energetic, really engaging player to watch. Now we're going to go on to the 8th overall pick in the San Jose Sharks. And the San Jose Sharks, especially in this position, I think would love to have a Jesper Wallstedt or a great shutdown D-man, but I don't think that there's really any of that this year, at least from what I've seen so far. Carson Lambos fits that mold, I guess, the best, but even then, I think has kind of had some cracks in the walls, I would say, and there just hasn't been consistent play there. So with the 8th overall pick, I think they'll go for an offensive D-man and go for Canadian D-man Brandt. Clarke. Now, Brandt Clarke has said time and time again he wants to mold his game around Erik Karlsson, and I think having Erik Karlsson in that franchise for quite a long time in the future will help Brandt Clarke's chances of getting picked by San Jose and staying with that team. But I think Brandt Clarke is a guy that would make an excellent San Jose Shark. Again, especially when you get to learn from guys offensively like Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns, and them being to mentor a body that's actually not old and brittle like Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns defensively. I think Brandt Clarke has a lot of potential there in terms of transition game, in terms of power play opportunity, but he's a great overall offensive transition defenseman. And I think for the San Jose Sharks, especially with the mold they're going for with D-Man, fits fantastic for that future. Then going on to the 9th overall pick, though, I'm going to go with another defenseman, and this is where the Chicago Blackhawks lie. And I know the Blackhawks have some good options going forward, obviously like guys like Boquist, Bodine, Ian Mitchell, but I think they will go for another D-man here after they've gone for forward since a few years ago with guys like Kirby Duck and Lucas Reichel in the past draft. So I think they're going to go for another Swedish player, and they will go with Simon Edvinsson. Now, Simon Edvinsson I would not pick in the top 10 personally, but there is potential there. I could see a situation where Edvinsson becomes the best defenseman in this draft. There is a very slim chance of that happening, but the potential is there. I think he's a great skill player, has a lot to offer, but the IQ and the decision making can just be so horrible sometimes. And I have compared him in the past to guys like Philip Broberg, but even Philip Broberg I think had better hockey IQ in his draft year, and I think that was a main issue for him, but it was still better on a consistent basis. With Edvinsson, he can sometimes be lost, but if Chicago can kind of rein in those skills, rein in that talent, then they could have a pretty good defenseman on their hands. Going on to the 10th overall pick, though, and rounding out the top 10 in this mock draft simulation, we're going to go now to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and for me, the obvious pick for them is Finnish centerman Aatu. Now, to give Aatu some credit, he's been really good in the league of these past few weeks, which is great to see because the start of the year for Aatu was just pretty disappointing and underwhelming, to say the least. But he's been a lot better since the World Juniors, which is great to see. He's been a lot more consistent and a lot just looking like he's playing his best hockey right now, which is good to see for him. And I think for the Columbus Blue Jackets, they'll want to have that on that team. I think he pretty much fits that Columbus mold perfectly. He's a hardworking, great defensive, great talented overall centerman. Not a guy that I see being a first-line center, but a guy as a second center option is pretty wonderful. And the Blue Jackets do need centermen right now, especially long-term. I think Aatu fits that mold amazingly, and as a 10th overall pick, I can't really complain too much. Then going on to the 11th overall pick, though, we're now going to go to the Buffalo Sabres, and once again, the Sabres right now will be a draft lottery team, unfortunately. We'll see if that continues, but I think for the Buffalo Sabres, they have quite a few quality options here, especially if they do go for a wing. Now, they went for Jack Quinn, of course, in the last draft, but I think they'll go for a left wing this time around and kind of fill out that left side, and I think they'll go for Edmonton-born winger Dylan Guenther. Now, Dylan Guenther hasn't been able to play. He's been in the WHL, but it has been in the AHL just a little bit there too, waiting for the WHL to start. But Dylan Guenther was incredible last year. He was the WHL Rookie of the Season, and I think was 100% deserved in that. He was amazingly offensive, and I think when it comes to Guenther, at least, he has a lot of potential with the Buffalo Sabres too. I mean, they already have some WHL experience drafting there, of course, with Dylan Cousins, but Guenther is a guy that just in terms of offense and in terms of overall makeup, he has a lot of great tools in his arsenal. Is very creative, very unpredictable as well. I think for the Buffalo Sabres at number 11, I would have him around that spot too in my rankings. I think it's a pretty good pick, and for the Buffalo Sabres as a top 6 winger, I think he could totally fill that role. Then we're going to go on to the number 12 pick, though, and the Nashville Predators. And this was another team that I was kind of confused on who to go with for them personally. But I really like their potential in drafting Swedish winger Fabian Lysell. Now, Lysell is one of my favorite players, I would say, quickly becoming one of my favorite players in this draft. He's a guy that the more I watch, the more I love. And I've underrated him at some points this year, but he's in my top 10 for sure right now. And I really love Lysell for a lot of different reasons. His offensive skill is really good, but his overall hockey IQ and defensive acumen is really consistent and really mature for a guy at his age. I really do like watching Fabian Lysell play, though, because he's a really energetic, really engaged player that doesn't really take many shifts off, and in terms of defensive play as well, you'd think for a Swedish winger it wouldn't be as good as Lysell brings on a daily basis, but it's super hard to play against his play style. And I think for the Nashville Predators, they'll love to have that on that wing going forward. But there's a lot of options for Nashville, so I wouldn't be surprised if they go for somebody different. Then going on to the 13th overall pick, and now we're going to go on to the New York Islanders. And with the Islanders being in a lot of position right now, I would be pretty interested to see who they go for, because they haven't, at least in the past couple of drafts, haven't really had much picks to work with. So getting the 13th overall pick is pretty huge for them. And I think they will go for Canadian D-man Carson Lambos. Now, Carson Lambos, I think, could really work for the New York Islanders if they're able to kind of get rid of some of the issues there. I think defensively, potentially, he can be the best defenseman of this draft. I still think there is potential there. I think my biggest problem right now is that he's kind of like a Brain Schneider type, where or kind of like a Ganguly type a little bit too sometimes, where it just seems like the possession and the dumping of the puck can be a little bit too excessive. Maybe that's because he's been playing the Ligas or in the Junior 20 Liga so far, but I have noticed that quite a bit. But I still think in terms of defensive reputation, in terms of what he's been able to put out and the skill that he has, I think he's a pretty solid defenseman. I think offensively also has some little bit of underratedness in him as well. But now we're going to go on to the 14th overall pick, and the Minnesota Wild. And the Wild, of course, got Marco Rossi, who's at Edom in the last draft. So who will they go for in the 2021 draft? Well, I'm going to go with Zachary Leroux. Now, he is a center listed right now and has been playing center in the QMJHL, but I think Zachary Leroux has pretty good potential to also play on the wing, and I think that would also work out pretty good for him. But either way, I think Leroux definitely fits the mold that the Minnesota Wild are going for, that they've had in the past and are going for in the future. He's a really hard-working, really hard-hitting player, especially on the forward side of things, and I think when it comes to Leroux, he has a little bit of everything. I wouldn't say he's a Swiss Army knife, but he does pack a punch in a lot of different ways, and no pun intended, does pack the punch. He can get physically engaged quite a bit too. I do like his skating, though it does need some improvements. I do think the skill is there. Not one of the top of this draft, but he just does a lot of little things well. I think for the Minnesota Wild, they'll definitely respect that leadership, and we'll love to have that on that top 6 going forward. But now, we're going to finish off with the 15th overall pick and go to the Anaheim Ducks, who right now would select number 15. And for me, they have a lot of different options, but I think they're going to go for a defenseman in this spot, even though at number 15, there's a lot less options than obviously if they were to go for the first overall pick. But I think they're going to go with Czech-born D-man Stanislav Svozil. Now, Svozil is one of the more, I would say, refined prospects of this draft. There is still a lot of work to do, and I think especially he'll probably take a couple of years at least to get to the NHL level, but I really like Svozil in terms of what he can bring for Anaheim as well. They've already kind of built, or trying to build kind of a trifecta puck-moving defenseman, guys like Jimmy Drysdale, Josh Mahora, and I think Svozil type could really kind of complete that trifecta and be a great part of that Ducks defense going forward. But that's going to be it for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Of course, if you did enjoy, please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that notification bell. Of course, if you haven't, let me know in the comments down below, though, what do you agree and disagree with, and who do you see as the top prospects in this draft? Where do you see these prospects going? Who do you think goes first overall? And let me know all your thoughts. Of course, share this video with your friends. Get the mock draft simulation out there, boys. And click on this card right here to watch all of my hockey prospects talk right on one playlist. My name is Nathan. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video or stream. Goodbye.